Hello, tonight we drift back to a time before time itself, before stars were strung across the sky, or seas began to whisper against the shore. This is the story of how everything began, not from light, but from silence, from the endless nothing the Norse called Ginnungagap. So, before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you're listening somewhere far away, maybe under a different sky entirely, tell us where you are and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, let the room settle, and let's drift into tonight's journey together. They say that before all things, there was no sky, no land, no sea, only an immeasurable gap stretching between two extremes. To the north lay Niflheim, the realm of mist and cold, where 12 rivers of venom and frost flowed endlessly. To the south burned Muspelheim, the land of fire, where sparks danced like living spirits and flame licked the edges of the void. Between them, Ginnungagap hung in stillness and emptiness so complete it defied understanding. Yet from that stillness came movement, and from that movement, creation. Where the breath of ice met the warmth of fire, the frost began to melt, and drops of water fell into the gap. Each drop carried a flicker of life, and from this union of opposites, cold and heat, stillness and fury, the first living being emerged. He was Ymir, the ancestor of all giants, vast, powerful, and strange. His form was shaped by chaos itself, half flesh, half frost, his breath steaming in the air. He slept, and from the sweat of his armpits new beings began to grow, the first frost giants, immense and hungry, their eyes glimmering like glaciers under the first light of creation. Beside him appeared a second being, not born of chaos, but of nourishment and care. Her name was Orthhumla, the cosmic cow, the first mother. She nourished Ymir with rivers of milk that flowed from her 4 udders, sustaining him as the frost receded. In turn, she herself fed by licking the salty ice that formed along the edge of Ginnungagap. Day after day she licked, until at last something new began to appear beneath the frost, the shape of a man frozen in the ice. On the first day she uncovered his hair, on the second his face, and on the third the full form of a being radiant with life. His name was Buri, the first of the gods, ancestor to Odin himself. Buri stood tall, gleaming like sunlight reflected on snow, a symbol of order rising from the chaos of creation. Historians still argue whether these tales were meant as literal cosmogony or poetic allegory, a way for early Norse storytellers to express the meeting of extremes that shaped their harsh northern world. Yet, whatever the truth, the story resonates. Warmth and cold, chaos and form, forever locked in creative tension. Buri's line would shape the future. His son, Bor, married Bestla, a daughter of the frost giants, and from their union came 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve. These brothers would soon define the fate of all things. But for now, the world was still unformed, raw, untamed, and filled with the uneasy breath of new life. The rivers of Niflheim still poured venom and frost into the gap, while sparks from Muspelheim continued to drift northward, fusing and cracking as they met the cold air. One could almost imagine the sound of it, a low hum of creation, like ice thawing under the first sun of spring. The air grew thick with mist, and in that mist, shapes began to move, shadows of what would become worlds, spirits, and destinies. And somewhere in that vast emptiness, Ymir stirred. Each of his steps sent tremors through the still soft earth. When he drank from rivers that had no source. When he breathed, his breath made the air itself. The Norse poets said he was both creator and destroyer, that his mere existence kept the chaos alive. There's a quirky theory whispered among mythologists with a smile that Ymir might have represented not just a being, but the idea of matter itself, the raw physical stuff of the universe. If so, then the gods who would later rise from his body were not just divine figures, but symbols of consciousness, shaping substance the mind, giving meaning to the world around it. A poetic thought, perhaps, but fitting for a myth born in long northern nights, when imagination filled the darkness. As the frost receded further, a strange light spread across the gap, not sunlight, but a reflection from Muspelheim's flames. The edges of Ginnungagap shimmered as if a dawn had come, though no sun yet existed. Somewhere, perhaps for the first time, silence broke the faint crack of ice giving way to water. In that moment, creation itself took a breath. Ymir looked upon the void and saw only endless possibility, but in his shadow the seeds of conflict were already stirring. From his body's warmth came life, and with life, rivalry. The frost giants multiplied, and their hunger grew. And among the children of Buri, whispers began to form, whispers of shaping, of order, of destiny. For even in this earliest moment, the Norse saw the truth. Their cold lands taught them well. Creation and destruction are never far apart. Every thaw leads to flood. Every spark risks fire. And in that fragile balance, the story of gods and giants was just beginning to unfold. Soon, the sons of Buri would rise, and the first world, carved from Ymir himself, would take shape. But for now, the Ginnungagap still stretched silent and wide the womb of everything that ever was or would be. In the dim half-light of creation, the frost still steamed where Muspelheim's warmth met Niflheim's breath. The great gap Ginnungagap had begun to fill with the hum of movement, and in its centre stood Ymir, the first being. He was enormous, his body half-formed, his voice a rumble that echoed across the still air. Around him drifted mist, glowing faintly with the warmth of new life. Ymir was not a god, not yet, not exactly. He was a bridge between chaos and order, born of both fire and ice. His every breath stirred the forming winds, his every movement set rivers in motion. When he slept, strange things happened. From the sweat of his armpits, it is said, came the first of the frost giants, huge beings with teeth like glaciers and eyes like frozen stars. And from between his legs, a son and daughter were born, without mother, without father, life springing unbidden from life itself. Beside Ymir roamed Allhumla, the sacred cow, calm amid the roaring of creation. Her body was vast and gentle, her hide pale as the snows that would one day blanket Midgard. 4 rivers of milk flowed from her, nourishing Ymir as he dreamed his heavy dreams. She was purity in a world not yet divided into good and evil, life and death. And in her quiet way, she too created. She licked the salt-covered ice at the edge of Ginnungagap, and from the melting frost revealed something astonishing. First, strands of hair, then a noble face, and finally a whole being Buri, the first of the gods. He stood tall, bright as the morning sun that had not yet risen, the image of intelligence and will. If Ymir embodied the raw chaos of the world, Buri embodied its potential for structure and spirit. Buri was strong and fair, and soon he fathered a son named Bor. Bor, in turn, took as his wife Bestla, one of the frost giant's daughters. From their union came 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve. They were not yet the gods of Asgard, not yet the shapers of worlds, but the spark of divinity burned bright within them. The Norse poets imagined them wandering through the vast void, surrounded by the first forms of matter, icebergs floating through fog, fiery stones raining from Muspelheim, rivers forming and freezing again in endless cycles. These young gods watched the world take shape and began to understand that creation needed direction. Still, danger was never far. Ymir's offspring, the frost giants, multiplied quickly. They filled the still unformed spaces with their booming laughter and constant hunger. They were creatures of instinct, wild as the storms that howled across Niflheim. Some say that even then they envied the gods to be their clarity, their fire of thought. Others claim it was simply their nature to resist order, to keep chaos alive. Historians still argue whether the tale of Ymir was meant to reflect a cosmic conflict or a symbolic truth about balance, the idea that creation cannot exist without destruction. After all, in the Norse worldview, the universe was not born from harmony, but from the meeting of opposites, the push and pull that kept everything in motion. There's a curious tidbit that myth scholars like to point out. The cow, Allhumla's name, roughly translates to rich, hornless one, suggesting not a domestic creature, but a primal source of sustenance, like the Milky Way itself feeding creation. Some even propose that she symbolized the stars of the northern sky, licking away the ice of night to reveal the light of dawn beneath. It's a poetic image, one that fits the quiet wonder of this early world. As time flowed, though time had not yet been named, the three young gods grew restless. They looked upon Ymir and saw in him not a father figure, but a problem. He was vast, ever-consuming, and his children filled the void with noise and frost. They realized that as long as Ymir lived, there could be no true order, no defined world. One night, if night can be said to exist before the first sunrise, the brothers gathered and spoke quietly. Odin, already the keenest of them, was the first to voice the unthinkable. The old must fall, he said, for the new to rise. And so they acted. When Ymir slept, the brothers approached him. They used the raw power born within them, strength, will, and wisdom, and they struck. The great giant awoke in terror, his cry shattering the mists and shaking the rivers from their paths. Blood poured from him in torrents so vast that it drowned nearly all the frost giants, leaving only 2 survivors who fled to distant lands. From them, it is said, would descend all future giants, the eternal foes of the gods. The brothers stood in silence as the world fell still again. Ymir's immense body lay before them, stretching across the gap. And in that moment, Odin saw possibility. With reverence and purpose, they began to shape. From Ymir's flesh, they made the earth. From his blood, they formed the seas and rivers. His bones became mountains. His teeth and shattered fragments of bone became rocks and cliffs. His skull they set high above as the sky, and from the fiery sparks of Muspelheim they made the stars that glittered in its vast dome. They placed his eyebrows as a boundary, a wall encircling a new world, which they named Midgard, the realm of men, though no humans yet walked it. It was order drawn from chaos, form born from dissolution. The story might sound violent, but in the Norse mind, it wasn't cruelty, it was necessity. From the breaking of one came the birth of many. Creation demanded sacrifice. As the last of Ymir's blood seeped into the still-forming soil, Odin and his brothers stood and watched the first winds stir across their new land. The mists parted, revealing an endless horizon of mountains and sea. Above them, the stars flickered softly, and for the first time, something like peace settled over the world. But the gods knew this peace would not last. In the far corners of the realms, the surviving giants were already gathering strength. The balance between order and chaos was fragile, and always would be. And so, the first gods stood together, gazing out upon the world they had made from their ancestor's body. It was beautiful, it was dangerous, and it was only the beginning. When the storm of Ymir's death faded, silence once again wrapped around the new world. The three brothers, Odin, Vili, and Ve, stood upon the still wet earth they had made from his flesh. The air smelled of salt and frost, and the stars above them shimmered within the great bowl of Ymir's skull. It was a sight both magnificent and haunting. They had done the unthinkable, killed the first being, and yet, from that act of destruction, beauty had been born. The rivers still ran thick with Ymir's blood, carving paths that would one day become fjords and valleys. His bones jutted like mountain ridges, his hair spread across the earth as forests, and his skull formed the great dome of heaven. Beneath that vast sky, the brothers began to give names to things. Naming was power. Naming meant order. The formless chaos that had once filled Ginnungagap was now shaped by words and thought. The brothers worked in harmony, each bringing a gift. Odin, the eldest, lent vision and wisdom. Vili offered will and determination. Ve, the youngest, brought emotion and sacred order, the sense of connection between things. Together, they balanced creation with care. Still, the world felt incomplete. Though the stars glimmered and the seas rolled, there was no life beyond their own. The air was still, the soil untouched. Odin looked across Midgard, the land they had enclosed within Ymir's eyebrows, and felt a quiet longing. He knew that a world without life was only half a world. So the brothers wandered along the new coastline one day, and came upon two fallen trees, lying side by side upon the sand. One was ash, pale and strong, the other elm, dark and graceful. The brothers paused, seeing something familiar in their shape, something like the potential for thought and spirit. Odin knelt beside them and breathed deeply, then spoke softly. From these, let life arise. They began their work. Odin bent close and breathed life into the wood. His breath became their soul. Vili gave them understanding, the ability to reason and remember. Ve shaped their senses, the gift of sight, hearing, and touch. And when they were done, the two trees stirred. From the ash came the first man, Ask. From the elm came the first woman, Embla. They stood upon the new earth, fragile but alive, blinking at the stars for the first time. The brothers watched with quiet pride as the humans took their first breaths and began to explore their strange new world. Odin smiled faintly. Let them walk beneath our sky, he said. Let them build and learn. Let them live. And so, humanity began. The Norse saw this moment not just as the dawn of humankind, but as the birth of purpose itself. The world was no longer just an accident of fire and ice. It was a realm of meaning, of striving, of stories yet to come. Historians still argue whether the myth of Ask and Embla reflected older Indo-European traditions, or arose purely in the north, born from the landscape of forests and storms. But perhaps, as one scholar once joked, it hardly matters who first thought trees could dream. What matters is that someone did. The brothers didn't stop there. They lifted sparks from Muspelheim and flung them into the heavens, setting them to spin across the night as the first stars. They placed two great orbs to light the world, the sun and the moon. The sun, they said, was guided by a maiden named Sol, forever chased across the sky by the wolf Skirl. The moon was her brother Mani, hunted by the wolf Hati. Thus, even the heavens carried a reminder that creation was always pursued by destruction, that peace was fleeting. There's an oddly charming detail from later Norse poems. Some say that the gods built the sun's chariot using sparks of fire and attached horses with names that translate to early waker and swift runner. It's a little domestic. Touch amid all the cosmic grandeur, proof that even gods, it seems, liked a bit of craftsmanship. With light came rhythm, day and night, time itself. The brothers divided the sky into seasons and ordered the stars so that sailors and wanderers might one day find their way. From nothing, they had woven not only matter but meaning. And yet, even as Odin gazed at his work, he sensed something missing, a pulse he could not name. For the world was still young, and its threads were still loose. He felt that everything, even the gods, were part of a cycle that would turn again. Creation, after all, was never permanent. Down below, Ask and Embla built their first shelter from driftwood and stone. They learned to light fires from sparks and sang softly into the night, unaware that their voices were the first human music ever heard. The wind moved through the new forests, carrying the sound across the land. The gods listened. Some say Odin felt a pang of affection, then a strange fatherly warmth. Others claim he already foresaw what humanity would one day bring, both beauty and ruin. Historians still debate whether Odin's compassion for humans marked a shift from older, harsher views of the divine, or whether it was simply a poetic invention of later storytellers. But either way, the image endures three brothers standing on a new shore, watching their fragile creation take its first uncertain steps. When the stars deepened and the sea grew quiet again, the brothers spoke of what must come next. "We have made a world," said Odin, "but a world alone cannot endure. There must be places beyond it, each with its own purpose." And so they began to imagine realms, worlds layered one upon another, tied together by something vast and living that would connect them all. It was the next great act of shaping, and it would give the cosmos its spine. But that is a story for another night, when the wind through the ash tree becomes a whisper, and its roots reach deeper than any mountain. The brothers stood upon the new land they had made from Ymir's body, but they knew their work was not yet done. The world needed structure, a way for all its parts to exist together. Without it, everything would drift apart, swallowed again by the emptiness of Ginnungagap. And so, from the seed of an ash tree that had sprouted near the world's edge, Odin breathed life into something far greater than any single realm. Its trunk rose so high that its top vanished into light, and its roots plunged so deep that they touched the foundations of the underworld. It would hold everything together, the seen and the unseen, the living and the lost. They called it Yggdrasil, the world tree. Its branches spread across the heavens, and its roots reached into the deepest shadows. Dew from its leaves fell to the earth each morning, feeding rivers and seas. Birds sang in its highest boughs, while serpents coiled in the darkness below. The brothers looked upon it and knew this was the axis of all creation, the great connection between worlds. From that moment, the cosmos took form as 9 realms, each distinct, yet joined through Yggdrasil's living veins. At the highest level stood Asgard, the shining home of the Aesir gods. It was a place of golden halls and wide fields, where the air shimmered with power. Odin, Vili, and Ve built its first great fortress, Valaskialf, and upon its throne Odin could look across all realms. Here the gods would dwell, not as rulers of mortals, but as keepers of balance. Below Asgard stretched Midgard, the realm of humankind. The gods wove a great circle of protection around it, built, it said, from Ymir's eyebrows, to keep out the chaos of the outer worlds. Midgard was wild and beautiful, filled with mountains, rivers, and deep forests. Its people would live in both awe and fear of the gods above, bound to them by threads, invisible yet unbreakable. Far to the north lay Jotunheim, the land of giants, a harsh and jagged wilderness. Here the frost and fire giants lived in uneasy peace, watching the gods with envy and defiance. Their mountains were tall as the clouds, and storms never ceased to roll across their skies. The brothers knew that from Jotunheim would come both danger and wisdom for the giants, though fierce, held ancient knowledge. Deep beneath the earth lay Svartalfheim, the shadowed realm of the dwarves. These beings, born from the maggots that had feasted on Ymir's flesh, were clever beyond measure. They forged wonders in the dark, their forges lit by the glow of molten stone. Their hammers struck sparks that echoed like heartbeats beneath the world. Nearby shimmered Alfheim, the realm of the light elves, bright and graceful. They danced in sunbeams and tended the hidden energies of nature. Their laughter was said to make flowers bloom, and their sorrow could turn rivers cold. Odin granted this realm to Freyr, a Vanir god of peace and fertility, as a token of alliance yet to come. Far beneath the roots of Yggdrasil was Niflheim, realm of ice and mist, where the dragon Nidhögg gnawed at the tree's roots, eager to undo creation itself. Close to it lay Helheim, the realm of the dead, not a place of torment, but of stillness, ruled by Hel, Loki's daughter, whose face was half beautiful, half decayed. Here came the souls of those who died not in battle but of sickness, age, or sorrow. To the south blazed Muspelheim, home of fire, still ruled by Surtur, a giant wreathed in flame. His sword burned brighter than the sun, and prophecy said that one day he would rise to burn the world clean. For now, though, he remained silent, a reminder that even creation carried the seed of its end. And between them all, at the centre of Yggdrasil's great span, was Vanaheim, the home of the Vanir gods, who would soon play their part in the great stories to come. They were gentler, closer to nature, yet no less powerful. Where the Aesir ruled with strength, the Vanir ruled with wisdom and the cycles of life. The gods stood beneath Yggdrasil and listened. If you were there, you might have heard it too, the slow, steady pulse of the tree, like a living heartbeat. The rustle of its leaves was said to carry every whisper from every world, every prayer, every cry. Odin closed his eyes and smiled faintly. "It is whole," he said, "and yet it will never be still." Historians still argue whether Yggdrasil was meant to symbolize an actual cosmic map or a spiritual metaphor, the idea that all things are connected through an invisible order. Either way, the image endured across centuries. The universe as a vast tree, ever growing, ever renewing, its roots tangled with fate itself. And there's a curious little note from old Norse manuscripts. Some say that Yggdrasil dripped honeydew that fed a mysterious stag, which in turn created the clouds by breathing mist from its nostrils. It's the kind of detail that makes the myth feel oddly natural, like the Norse storytellers couldn't help but turn even cosmic wonder into something you could almost imagine seeing out your window on a foggy morning. At Yggdrasil's very top perched a great eagle, whose eyes saw across all realms. Between its eyes sat a hawk named Vedafalnir, sharp and restless, and at its roots the serpent Nidhögg hissed and clawed. The two quarrelled endlessly, sending a squirrel named Ratatoska scampering up and down the trunk to carry insults between them, a cosmic game of telephone that somehow kept eternity entertained. Odin watched this cycle of harmony and mischief with quiet amusement. He knew the balance would never be perfect. The world, like Yggdrasil, would always creak and groan under its own weight, but it would endure as long as someone cared to remember. And so the first great order of the cosmos was complete. The worlds spun in their places, light and shadow intertwined, connected by the living bridge of the ash tree. And beneath its roots, unseen, fate itself began to weave its first patterns, threads that even Odin would one day struggle to understand. Above the clouds, where light met mist, the gods began to build a home worthy of their new dominion. It was not born all at once, but piece by piece, like a dream taking shape in the golden air. The brothers, Odin, Vili, and Ve, gathered the other divine beings who had emerged in the early days, and together they raised the walls of a new realm. They called it Asgard, the enclosure of the Aesir. The ground there was luminous, the air clear as glass, and the rivers shone with reflections of flame and ice, the ancient forces that had birthed them all. From Yggdrasil's highest boughs, the roots of the world still hummed beneath their feet, a reminder that creation and chaos remained forever intertwined. The gods were young, then curious, restless, full of laughter and ambition. They built shining halls that gleamed like dawn. Valaskjalf, Odin's silver-roofed tower, from which he could see all worlds. Gladsheim, the council hall where the gods gathered to decide the fates of mortals and monsters alike. And Vingolf, the place of feasts and welcome. Every hammer strike echoed across the heavens as dwarves from Svartalfheim crafted marvels for their divine patrons. The dwarves had already proven themselves the finest smiths in all the realms, working deep underground where molten rivers lit their workshops. They forged treasures that seemed alive, the chains that could hold beasts of chaos, the blades that would never dull, and the jewels that glowed with inner fire. In return, the Aesir offered them protection and divine favour, though both sides eyed each other warily. The dwarves distrusted the gods' pride, and the gods feared the dwarves' cunning. Still, they needed one another. Order always needs craft to endure. Odin himself often wandered among the smithies, watching sparks leap like stars. He was learning already that wisdom came not only from power, but from curiosity. He would speak to the dwarves about the nature of metal and memory, about how every hammer strike leaves an echo in the world. One dwarf, a trickster named Brock, once joked that Odin asked more questions than a raven with two beaks. Odin smiled at that he had always liked ravens. It was during these early years of creation that the gods first met Loki. He appeared not in thunder or light, but as a stranger who arrived laughing, claiming to have wandered from Jotunheim. His hair was red as fire, his eyes sharp with mischief. Some said he was the son of a giant. Others whispered he was born of the very flames of Muspelheim. Whatever his origin, he moved like someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere. Odin saw something in him, perhaps a reflection of the chaos that still lived within creation. And so, despite the warnings of others, he welcomed Loki among the gods. "Better a clever friend than a dull enemy," Odin said, half in jest. It was a choice that would one day cost them dearly. For now, though, Loki's wit was a delight. He could make even Thor broad-shouldered. Thunderous Thor burst into laughter with his quick tongue and reckless humour. He solved problems the others could not, twisting logic until the impossible became possible. When the gods lost something, Loki found it. When they quarrelled, he smoothed things over, though often it was a quarrel he'd started in the first place. Historians still argue whether Loki was ever truly part of the Aesir, or always an outsider tolerated for his usefulness. Some believe he represented the unpredictability of the natural world, the storms and fires that could both nourish and destroy. Others see him as a symbol of the human mind itself, creative, deceitful, restless. A quirky little detail tucked into old sagas tells that Loki once sheared all of Thor's wife, Sif's golden hair, while she slept, simply for fun. Thor nearly crushed him for it, until Loki promised to have the dwarves craft new hair golden strands that would grow like real locks. In doing so, he accidentally set off a chain of events that led to the forging of many of the gods' greatest treasures. But that's a tale for later, when laughter will turn to fury. Back in those early days, Asgard shone like dawn. The gods feasted, planned, and explored their newborn cosmos. Odin's ravens, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, began their daily flights across the realms, bringing news back to their master. At night, the skies above Asgard blazed with auroras, and the gods looked down upon Midgard, where humans were learning to hunt, build fires, and whisper prayers to the heavens. The bond between gods and mortals deepened. Sometimes, the Aesir would walk among humans in disguise, testing their hospitality or sharing secret knowledge. There are old Norse proverbs still quoted in Scandinavian villages centuries later that claim, "When a stranger knocks, treat him kindly, for he may be Odin in a worn cloak." The world itself began to find its rhythm. The sun and moon ran their eternal race across the sky. The stars wheeled in their places. The sound of hammers in Asgard echoed faintly in the hearts of men below, who learned from it the art of building. Yet even amid this golden age, Odin's gaze was often distant. He knew that creation was not a static thing, it would not stay perfect forever. His dreams were haunted by visions of wolves chasing the sun, of trees burning, of gods falling. But he kept these fears to himself. For now, there was work to be done, and laughter to share. And sometimes, in the feasting halls of Asgard, Loki would rise with a grin and a goblet of mead, declaring, "The world may end one day, but at least we'll have good stories to tell about it." Even Odin had to admit that part, at least, was true. Long before mortals began carving runes into stone, before even the great sagas were whispered by the fire, there came a time when the gods turned their fury not upon giants, but upon one another. It began, as so many wars do, with pride. The Aesir, rulers of Asgard, saw themselves as the rightful stewards of creation, keepers of order, law, and the shining structure of the cosmos. But far to the west, in a realm veiled by mist and fertile fields, another family of gods thrived, the Vanir. The Vanir were ancient, close to the earth and sea. They presided over fertility, prosperity, and the quiet cycles of nature. Where the Aesir valued glory and conquest, the Vanir tended the soil, the tides, and the mysterious flows of magic that linked all living things. For a long while, the two clans existed apart, each powerful in their own way. Yet peace cannot endure when both sides believe they should rule. The first spark came from a goddess named Gullveig. She arrived in Asgard under the guise of a wandering seeress, her golden hair gleaming, her eyes reflecting secrets from beyond the stars. She spoke of Seidr, an ancient form of magic tied to fate and desire, far older than the Aesir themselves. The Vanir had long practiced it, bending the threads of destiny with songs and symbols. Odin, ever hungry for knowledge, welcomed her, but others grew suspicious. Her words unsettled them. Her powers seemed too wild, too close to chaos. When Gullveig spoke of wealth and pleasure, of gold that gleamed brighter than honour, the Aesir accused her of corruption. In their fear and anger, they tried to destroy her. 3 times they cast her into fire. 3 times she rose again, unburned, laughing softly in the smoke. That was the breaking point. The Vanir saw what had been done to one of their own and declared war. It was a war unlike any other, gods against gods, kin against kin. The skies turned red with fire, and the roots of Yggdrasil shuddered from the echoes of their fury. Lightning clashed with waves, storms rolled across the realms for 9 long years. The Aesir fought with brute strength and iron discipline. Thor's hammer crushed mountains, and Odin led his warriors with strategy born from his all-seeing wisdom. But the Vanir's magic was deep and old. They made the fields themselves rise against Asgard's walls. Their gods, Njord, Freyr, and Freya, commanded the winds and waters, their charms weaving confusion among enemy ranks. Historians still argue whether the war truly happened in a literal sense, or if it symbolized the merging of 2 early Norse cultures, perhaps one seafaring, one agrarian, that later combined into the mythology we know. But to the skalds, the storytellers of old, it was as real as thunder. After endless years of destruction, neither side could claim victory. The war had cost too much. Even gods grow weary of ruin. And so the Aesir and Vanir met to forge peace. The treaty was strange, as divine bargains often are. Each side swore oaths, spat into a great cauldron as a sign of truce, and agreed to exchange hostages not as prisoners, but as symbols of trust. From the Vanir came Njord, god of the sea and wealth, and his children Freyr and Freya. Njord brought the wisdom of the waves, Freya brought prosperity and peace, and Freya brought beauty and the deep secrets of Seidr magic. From the Aesir they sent Fenrir, a handsome but indecisive god, and Mimir, the wise keeper of knowledge. It was not a perfect exchange. When the Vanir discovered that Fenrir could make no decisions without Mimir whispering advice, they grew furious and sent Mimir's severed head back to Asgard. But Odin, unwilling to lose such wisdom, preserved the head with herbs and magic, keeping Mimir alive as a whispering oracle. Yes, a talking head of wisdom, by far one of the more unusual details in Norse myth, and possibly one of the oldest. Despite these grim misunderstandings, peace held. The 2 tribes merged, their powers and traditions interwoven. The Aesir learned Seidr from Freya herself, Odin especially, who endured shame among his peers for practicing what was considered a woman's art. But wisdom was worth more to him than pride. The Vanir found a home in Asgard, and their presence softened its martial edge. Freya brought blessings to crops and weather, ensuring mortals would survive the long winters. Njord taught the gods the language of tides and trade, linking distant worlds through the sea. Freya, radiant and mysterious, became the goddess of love and war, teaching that both could exist side by side. In time, the 2 families became indistinguishable in the eyes of mortals. The war faded into memory, leaving only echoes in ritual and story. Even centuries later, in Viking Age Scandinavia, traces of this old duality remained. Farmers prayed to Freya for rain and to Thor for thunder. Sailors asked Njord for fair winds, but swore oaths to Odin before battle. The divine families had merged, not only in heaven, but in the hearts of the people. And though Asgard stood peaceful once more, Odin knew that every peace is only borrowed time. He had seen visions of the end, already a day when gods and giants would fall together. The Vanir War had shown him how fragile even divine harmony could be. Still, there were moments of calm between the storms. In the evenings, when the halls of Asgard filled with golden light and laughter, Odin would raise his horn of mead and glance toward Freya and Freya at the feast tables. The Aesir and Vanir would share stories and songs, their voices blending like 2 rivers finally joined. And perhaps for a moment, just a moment, the All-Father allowed himself to believe that peace could last. Peace had returned to Asgard, or at least the sort of peace that gods can keep. The great halls shone once more with laughter, feasting, and mead that flowed like golden rivers. The Aesir and Vanir had found a rhythm together, their quarrels softened by shared purpose. But among the shining walls, one god was never still. Loki. His mind was a whirlwind, part fire, part shadow, always hungry for the next spark of amusement. He'd helped the gods through countless scrapes, though usually those scrapes were of his own making. Some called him a friend of Odin, others a menace in disguise. Both were true, and it was Loki who one bright morning set in motion the creation of the greatest treasures the gods would ever possess. It began with a prank, naturally. One day, Loki noticed Sif, Thor's wife, asleep in the warm sunlight. Her golden hair glowed like a field of wheat, shimmering softly against her shoulders. It was said her hair was what made the summer fields fertile, that her beauty blessed the harvests of Midgard itself. Loki smiled. He picked up a blade, and before the sun had moved a finger's breadth, Sif's head was bare as a polished stone. When Thor discovered the deed, the ground trembled beneath his rage. The god of thunder burst into Loki's chamber, red-bearded and roaring, lightning already crackling between his fingers. "You've gone too far this time, trickster," he thundered. Loki, ever quick on his feet, literally, as he was halfway out the window by then, swore that he would make things right. "I'll bring her hair back," he pleaded. "Better than before. Hair spun from real gold, crafted by the finest smiths in all the worlds." And so, to avoid being turned into a thunderbolt, Loki set off for Svartalfheim, the realm of the dwarves. Deep underground, he found the sons of Ivaldi master craftsmen with soot-black hands and eyes like molten ore. He begged them to forge a new head of hair for Sif, one that would grow as real hair does. The dwarves agreed, but being artisans, they couldn't resist showing off. They made 3 gifts in total. Sif's golden hair, finer than sunlight. Skidbladnir, a ship that could fold small enough to fit in a pocket, but always catch the perfect wind. And Gungnir, Odin's spear, which would never miss its mark. Even Loki was impressed. But his mischief couldn't let things end there. On his way out, he taunted another group of dwarf brothers, Brock and Sindri, claiming they could never match the Ivaldi's skill. The brothers bristled. They accepted the challenge, wagering their heads against Loki's that they could craft items of even greater wonder. Loki agreed instantly. A bet, after all, was just another playground for his chaos. Brock and Sindri went to work. The forge glowed with hellish heat, hammers ringing in rhythm with the heart of the earth. But Loki, unwilling to lose, transformed himself into a biting fly. He buzzed through the forge, landing on Brock's eyelid, his neck, his hand stinging at the worst possible moments to ruin their work. Still, the dwarves endured. Through pain and blood and sweat, they produced 3 magnificent treasures. Draupnir, a golden ring that would drip 8 new rings every 9th night, a symbol of endless wealth. Gullinbursti, a shining boar with bristles of light, swift enough to outrun any horse. And Mjolnir, the hammer that would become Thor's most fearsome weapon. The handle, however, was shorter than intended. Loki's last sting had distracted Brock at the final strike. The dwarves glared at the fly, now back in Loki's smug shape, but the work was done. The gods of Asgard gathered to judge which set of gifts was finest. Odin admired Gungnir, its balance perfect, its power absolute. Freya marvelled at Gullinbursti, which shimmered like dawn on metal. Thor's eyes widened as he lifted Mjolnir, lightning coiling around it as if greeting an old friend. When Thor swung it, the sky itself rumbled. The hammer always returned to his hand and could crush even mountains. Despite its short handle, none could deny it was the greatest weapon ever made. The dwarves had won. Brock demanded Loki's head, as promised. Loki smiled thinly and said, "You may have my head, but not my neck." The dwarves realized that cutting off one without harming the other was impossible. So instead, they sewed his mouth shut with wire. If you ever wonder where Loki learned to keep his mouth quiet for a change, well, that's the one and only time. He didn't stay silent long. Soon he was back among the gods, grinning as if nothing had happened. Thor wielded Mjolnir with pride. Odin bore Gungnir into battle, and the treasures became symbols of divine power across the 9 realms. Yet something in Loki had shifted. His tricks began to carry sharper edges. Where once he'd played for laughter, now he played for leverage. He whispered in Odin's ear, nudged old grudges between gods, stirred jealousies at feasts. None suspected how deep his cleverness ran, or how dangerous it would one day become. Historians still argue about Loki's true nature. Was he a symbol of chaos itself, a mythic embodiment of human unpredictability? Or perhaps a late addition to Norse belief, grafted onto older stories to explain the darker side of divine fate? Either way, the sagas are clear no tale of the gods could unfold without him. And in those quiet nights when the wind passed through Asgard's golden halls, Odin's ravens sometimes perched near Loki's chamber, whispering warnings in their low, knowing voices. For even they could sense that the same hands that had brought them Mjolnir would one day help forge something far more terrible. The gods laughed, feasted, and lived in peace for now. But beneath their laughter, a shadow began to stir. Thor's laughter could shake rafters. His footsteps made the clouds tremble. Among the Aesir, no god was more beloved by mortals than the red-bearded thunderer, their protector, their champion, their shield against the dark things beyond the horizon. When storms rolled across Midgard, peasants would murmur prayers to him, not in fear, but in gratitude. They believed his hammer, Mjolnir, was breaking apart the frost giants who sought to freeze the world again. The thunder, they said, was his laughter rolling across the sky. And though Thor's temper was short, his heart was large. He was no schemer like Odin or Loki. He preferred things simple foes to fight, ale to drink, and friends to protect. But simplicity is not always ease, and the world had a way of testing even the strongest arms. One of Thor's earliest adventures began when word reached Asgard that the giants of Jotunheim were plotting mischief again. The giants, children of the old chaos, never forgave the gods for killing Ymir and reshaping the world. So Thor, as always, volunteered to pay them a visit with his hammer in one hand and his trusty companion Loki in the other. The two made an odd pair, one muscle, one mischief. They set off in Thor's goat-drawn chariot, Tooth Gnasher and Tooth Grinder, whose hooves sparked lightning as they raced through the clouds. They stopped for the night at the home of a poor farmer, who, awed by the gods, offered what little food he had. In return, Thor slew his goats to provide a feast, but warned the farmer's children not to break the bones. When the meal was done, he raised Mjolnir and blessed the remains. The next morning, the goats rose again, alive and whole except one limped. The boy had cracked a bone to suck the marrow. Thor's brow darkened like a storm. But instead of striking the boy down, he took both children with him to serve as his new companions. Even his anger, it seemed, could bend toward mercy. When they reached Jotunheim, the land was wild, and immense mountains like sleeping beasts, rivers deep as memory. They found lodging in what appeared to be an enormous hall, but when dawn broke, they realized they'd spent the night inside the glove of a giant. That giant was Skrymir, whose snores could topple trees. Thor tried to kill him thrice as he slept, each time striking harder with Mjolnir. Yet Skrymir merely stirred, scratching his head and muttering, "Did a leaf fall on me?" Thor's blows, mighty enough to shatter cliffs, had sunk harmlessly into illusion. As they journeyed on, Skrymir challenged their pride, outpacing them easily, mocking their smallness. Finally, he led them to Utgard Loki, king of the giants, a master of deception and trickery. In Utgard Loki's great hall, the gods were told they could stay only if they proved themselves in contests. Loki boasted he could out-eat anyone. Thor claimed he could outdrink any giant alive. Both were accepted. Loki was paired against a being named Logi, who devoured his meal in a blur. When the table was cleared, Loki had eaten all the meat, but Logi had eaten meat, bones, and plate. Later, Thor faced a drinking horn that seemed bottomless. He drank 3 mighty gulps before gasping for air, but the liquid never lowered. Then he tried to lift a giant's cat. It arched its back, and he barely raised one paw. Finally, he entered a wrestling match with an old woman and was forced to his knees. Thor's humiliation burned like fire. But when they left the hall, Utgard Loki revealed the truth. Every test had been an illusion. The horn was connected to the sea. Thor's drinking had caused the tides to recede. The cat was no cat at all, but the great serpent Jörmungandr, who encircled the world, and Thor had nearly lifted it. The old woman was Elli, the spirit of old age, whom no one could defeat. Thor, half ashamed and half awed, clenched his hammer. He swung once, furious at the trick, but the giant and his castle vanished into thin air. It was a lesson that even strength cannot always conquer cunning, and though Thor would laugh about it later after a few horns of mead, the truth gnawed at him. Historians still argue whether the tale of Utgard Loki was meant to humble the Viking warrior spirit or to celebrate it. Was Thor's near victory against impossible odds a reminder of mortal limitation, or a symbol of courage itself? Perhaps both. The sagas often walk that line between pride and lesson, power and humility. Another famous tale tells of Thor's journey to fish with the giant Ymir. They set sail into deep, cold waters. While Ymir trembled, Thor baited his line with the head of an ox. The hook sank, the sea boiled, and something vast stirred below. Up from the black depths came Jörmungandr, the world serpent itself, scales glistening, eyes burning like suns. Thor heaved on the line until his veins bulged, his roar echoing across the waves. Lightning cracked above. The serpent's body rose higher, coiling around the sky. Thor raised Mjolnir to strike, but Ymir, terrified, cut the line. The serpent plunged back into the abyss, leaving Thor seething on the rocking boat. The waves whispered his name, as if mocking him. That, too, was a lesson. Some battles are meant to wait until the end of the world. And through it all, Loki remained at his side, smirking, whispering, provoking part friend, part mirror. For every hammer swing, there was a trick. For every victory, a riddle. In taverns and longhouses, centuries later, storytellers would chuckle as they spoke of Thor's misadventures, of him dressed as a bride to retrieve his stolen hammer, or of him smashing entire wedding parties of giants. These stories delighted Viking listeners, heroes who saw in Thor not just strength, but heart, humour, and the courage to charge headlong into absurdity. Thor was their god, yes, but he was also one of them stubborn, hungry, quick to laugh, and quick to rage. And in the halls of Asgard, after his travels, he would sit beside Sif, running his fingers through her golden hair, and tell stories of the giants who tricked him, the monsters he nearly slew, and the seas that trembled under his thunder. The gods would laugh, Loki loudest of all, but Odin, silent at the head of the table, would glance toward the horizon, for he knew that one day Thor's strength would be tested again, and this time the serpent would not slip away. For all the laughter in Asgard's golden halls, Odin's eyes were never still. One of them gleamed with worldly sight. The other, empty, seemed to stare inward into places unseen by any living being. The All-Father, they called him. But before he was a father to gods and men, Odin was a seeker. He longed for wisdom, not comfort, not safety, but truth, even when truth burned. To rule the realms, he believed, was not enough. To understand them, that was power. Long before he sat on the throne of Asgard, Odin had heard whispers of a place where all knowledge pooled like deep water. Beneath one of Yggdrasil's roots lay Mimir's Brunna, Mimir's well, the well of memory and understanding. Its keeper, Mimir, guarded it jealously, for it held the wisdom of the ages, the secrets of creation, the fates of gods, the meanings woven into the stars themselves. Odin came to him one twilight, his cloak heavy with travel, his ravens silent upon his shoulders. "I would drink," he said. Mimir's one good eye glimmered beneath his hood. "The water is not for thirst, All-Father. It is for sacrifice. Nothing comes from it without something being given." Odin nodded slowly. "Then I will give what I can least spare." And with no hesitation, he plucked out one of his eyes and placed it in the well. The water shimmered as it swallowed the orb, and in its reflection, Odin saw everything: the web of Yggdrasil's roots, the movements of the stars, and the faint, inevitable shadow of Ragnarök. When he rose, he could see the world differently. His remaining eye saw what was. The empty socket saw what would be. Even centuries later, the myth would echo in human memory. Viking warriors would paint one eye dark before battle, saying they fought with Odin's sight, half seeing life, half seeing death. But the All-Father's hunger was not sated. Knowledge, he learned, was not a pool one could drink dry. It was a flame that demanded more fuel. And so Odin's second great sacrifice began. He had learned that power older than speech lay hidden within the rune symbols that shaped reality itself. The gods used them without knowing why. The giants feared them, but none truly understood them. To master the runes, Odin would have to die not forever, but deeply enough to touch the secrets beyond life. And so, he chose to hang himself upon Yggdrasil, the world tree. He climbed its vast trunk to where its branches touched the sky and its roots reached into shadow. There, between heaven and death, he pierced himself with his own spear, Gungnir, and hung suspended for 9 nights. No food, no drink, no sound but the creak of the cosmic wind and the whispers of the Norns, the 3 sisters who wove fate. The sagas say the tree shook and groaned, unwilling to bear the gods' weight. The stars dimmed, the worlds trembled. Odin's mind drifted through pain and emptiness. He saw flashes of everything: the births of gods, the laughter of giants, the slow march of destiny. He saw his own death at Ragnarök, yet he did not cry out. He simply watched. Then, on the 9th night, as dawn broke across all 9 realms at once, the runes revealed themselves. They did not speak as words, but as understanding the shapes of truth itself. The runes fell into his mind like shards of starlight, and each carried power, the power to bless or curse, to heal or destroy, to bind or free. Odin gasped, and the spell broke. He fell from the tree, reborn. When he rose again, he knew the language of all things, the cries of ravens, the hum of iron, the silence between breaths. He became the master of runes and magic, the father of wisdom and war. Even among gods, his act was beyond comprehension. To sacrifice to oneself, to become both seeker and offering, teacher and student, that was something no other dared. Historians still argue what the myth meant to the ancient Norse. Some see it as a shamanic rite, a symbolic death to gain divine insight. Others believe it reflects the harsh realities of Viking life, that all wisdom, all victory, demands a price. A curious fringe theory even suggests the hanging may have once mirrored early initiation rituals among Norse priests, where initiates would symbolically hang to commune with the gods. Whether literal or metaphorical, Odin's ordeal became the soul of Norse philosophy, knowledge through sacrifice. And in a quiet way, it humanized him. For despite his power, Odin suffered as mortals did, bled, feared, doubted, and still sought meaning in a vast, uncertain world. He returned to Asgard changed. His ravens, Hugin and Munin memory, took flight every dawn to bring him news from every realm. He trusted them above all others. Each day I fear for Hugin, he once said, but I fear more for Munin. Thought may falter, but memory fades faster. In the evenings, the other gods would see him alone on Valaskialf's high seat, his one eye gazing into the distance, lips murmuring forgotten words. He had seen too much to ever truly rest. Yet Odin did not hoard his knowledge. From him came the art of poetry, the secrets of healing, the runic spells that seafarers carved on their ships for luck and strength. Even blacksmiths whispered charms in his name, echoing his wisdom with every strike of the hammer. There's a quiet detail in one saga easy to miss that says Odin's missing eye still gleams faintly at the bottom of Mimir's well, watching the world from below, unblinking. Some say that's why reflections ripple when the wind stirs still water, the Allfather opening his eye. Knowledge had made him powerful, but it had also made him lonely. For once you've seen everything, laughter comes slower and dreams come harder. Still, as the fires burned in Asgard's halls, Odin would sometimes smile faintly and say, "Even gods must hang to learn what it means to live." And somewhere, deep beneath Yggdrasil's roots, the runes stirred, waiting for the next seeker willing to bleed for truth. Long before Ragnarök was whispered in full, the gods already feared it. Not because they knew the when, but because they had heard the how. From the moment Odin drank from Mimir's well, a shadow had followed him, an echo of fate that spoke of betrayal, ruin, and a monstrous wolf who would devour the sun. The wolf's name was Fenrir. He was not born of beasts, but of the trickster himself, Loki and the giantess Angrboda, she who brings grief. From their strange, fated union came 3 children destined to shake the world. The serpent Ymir, who would encircle the seas, the half-living Hel, who would rule the dead, and Fenrir, whose jaws could already bite through iron before he was full grown. When Odin learned of their birth, his heart grew heavy. These were not mere monsters, they were prophecies given flesh. And so, in an act both cruel and cautious, he ordered them seized. Hel was sent to Niflheim to rule the underworld where cold souls wandered. Ymir was cast into the deepest ocean, where he grew until his coils wrapped around the world itself. But Fenrir they kept in Asgard, for at first the gods pitied him. He was young, fierce, and strangely intelligent. He prowled the golden courtyards of Asgard like a living storm, his eyes bright with fire. None dared feed him save one god Tyr, the bravest and most honourable of the Aesir. Tyr approached the wolf without fear. "Eat, Fenrir," he would say, laying a hand upon the creature's snout. "Grow strong, but remember, strength must serve more than hunger." And for a time, Fenrir obeyed. He grew faster than any beast had before. Soon, his shoulders brushed the clouds, and his howl made the roots of Yggdrasil tremble. When he ran, the ground shook. The gods began to look at him not as a ward, but as a weapon that might one day turn upon them. It was then that the whispers began. Odin's ravens returned each morning with the same warning. The wolf will break his bonds. The wolf will devour the All-Father. Odin gathered the gods in secret. We cannot kill him, he said, for that would only hasten the prophecy. But we can bind him, test his strength, while we still can. So they forged chains. The first was ladding, thick as an oak trunk. They brought it before Fenrir, their voices light with laughter. Come, mighty wolf, they said, prove your strength. Break this, and all shall call you the greatest of beasts. Fenrir grinned, his teeth like white spears. If you wish, he rumbled. He strained once, twice, and the chain shattered like straw. The gods nodded nervously. They forged another, dromy, twice as strong, forged from mountain roots and tempered in divine fire. Again they brought it before him with false mirth. Surely this one will hold. Fenrir growled but allowed it. He flexed his limbs, and with a roar that split the sky, Dromi snapped. The fragments flew like meteors, embedding themselves in distant lands. This time the gods did not laugh. They retreated to Asgard's deepest forge, where they summoned the dwarves of Svartalfheim, the greatest smiths of all. We need a binding, Odin said, that no strength can break. The dwarves agreed on one condition. They would forge it in secret, without revealing its nature. For to bind something born of chaos required trickery equal to Loki's own. From impossible things they wove the chain called Gleipnir, the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. Each ingredient a paradox, impossible yet true, for such is the logic of magic. When it was done, Gleipnir looked like silk, smooth, light, and beautiful. The gods marvelled that something so delicate could hold so much doom. They approached Fenrir again, this time upon a lonely island called Lyngvi, surrounded by the cold waters of the lake Amsvartnir. Great Fenrir, Odin said smoothly, we've made one final test. This ribbon is enchanted. No creature in all the realms could break it. If you can, we'll admit your strength is unmatched. Fenrir eyed the slender cord. You mock me, he growled. That thread could bind a child, not me. Yet if it is magic, then I will not be bound, unless one of you places a hand in my mouth as a pledge that no deceit is meant. The gods fell silent. None moved, none save Tyr. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and placed his hand between the wolf's massive jaws. Let it be done, he said quietly. The gods wound Gleipnir around Fenrir's legs, his body, his neck. The ribbon shimmered like moonlight. When they were done, they stepped back. Now, wolf, Odin said, show us your might. Fenrir strained. The earth cracked. His muscles bulged like molten stone. But Gleipnir did not break. It only tightened, soft and silent as a whisper. Then the wolf understood. His eyes blazed with betrayal. He lunged, snapping his jaws, and in that instant, Tyr lost his hand. The other gods turned away, ashamed yet relieved. They drove a sword between Fenrir's jaws to hold them open, and from his drooling mouth poured rivers that formed the stream Van, meaning hope, a cruel name for such bitterness. Bound and enraged, Fenrir howled. His cries echoed through all 9 realms, shaking Yggdrasil's roots. Even the Norns paused their weaving. Odin looked upon him and said, You are bound until the world ends. But know this, wolf, your time will come. And when you are free, so too shall the end come for us all. The wolf's eyes met his, burning with hatred. Then All-Father, he rumbled, we shall meet again in blood. And thus Asgard's peace was bought not with victory, but with dread deferred. The gods celebrated, yet none truly smiled, for they had chained their fear, not destroyed it. Every twilight thereafter, when Odin sat alone in his high seat, he could hear the faint echo of chains beneath the world, the rattle of Gleipnir shifting as the wolf dreamed of vengeance. Some mortals say that is why storms grow fierce at night. Fenrir, testing his bonds, hungering for the day they will snap. And in that quiet, Odin would murmur to himself, we did what must be done, yet every bond we make against ourselves. The prophecy had not been prevented, only postponed, for the day would come when the soft silk of Gleipnir would tear like air, and the wolf's roar would herald the twilight of the gods. Among all the gods of Asgard, none shone brighter than Baldur, son of Odin and Frigg. He was the light in their long twilight, fair, kind, and beloved by all who knew him. It was said that his laughter alone could warm even the frost of Jotunheim, and that his presence brought peace to gods, elves, and mortals alike. Where Odin ruled through wisdom and Thor through strength, Baldur ruled through gentleness. Flowers bloomed where he walked. The winds hushed when he spoke. Even the dwarves, who cared little for beauty, forged silver trinkets in his honour. But the gods learned long ago that beauty draws shadow and joy draws envy. One night, long before dawn, Baldur began to dream of death. He told no one at first, but soon the dreams became unbearable. Visions of himself lying pale and still, his golden hair dimmed, his body burning upon a great pyre. When Frigg, his mother, heard of it, she was struck with terror. A mother's instinct, sharper than any seer's rune, whispered that these dreams were not mere fancy. So she set out to do the impossible, to protect him from death itself. Frigg rode far and wide, from the peak of Asgard's walls to the depths of Midgard's rivers, pleading with all things in the 9 realms to swear an oath never to harm her son. She spoke to fire and water, to iron and stone, to disease and poison, to animals and plants. All agreed. We will not harm Baldur, they promised, for even the elements loved him. When she returned to Asgard, she was weary but relieved. He is safe, she said, smiling. Nothing in the world can hurt him. And so the gods rejoiced. To celebrate, they turned Baldur's immortality into a game. In the great hall of Gladsheim, they gathered daily to test the prophecy. They hurled spears, stones, and axes at him. They struck him with swords, threw him from heights, and set beasts upon him, and always he laughed, unharmed. It was, to them, an innocent game, but not to everyone. Standing at the edge of the crowd, watching with a cold smile, was Loki. Once again, the trickster's heart stirred with jealousy. The laughter of the gods had never included him, not truly. And now they adored Baldur, this perfect, shining favourite, as though no flaw could touch him. But Loki understood something they did not. There is no protection without a loophole. He disguised himself as an old woman and went to Fenrir, Frigg's hall, where she rested from her travels. The old woman's voice was soft. "Tell me, Lady of Asgard," she croaked, "is it true your son cannot be harmed by anything in this world?" Frigg smiled proudly. "It is true. Every living thing and every element swore an oath to spare him." "Everything?" the old woman asked gently. Surely there was something too small or harmless to bother with. Frigg chuckled. "Only one thing I did not ask, the mistletoe. It was too young, too frail. I thought it could do no harm." Loki's eyes gleamed behind the disguise. "Ah, he said softly. A mother's love makes strange judgments. He bowed, thanked her, and left. That night, Loki slipped through the forests of Midgard until he found a sprig of mistletoe, pale and innocent-looking, growing on an oak. He plucked it carefully, shaping it into a small dart. By the next morning, the gods were once again gathered in Gladsheim, laughing as they pelted Baldur with every weapon known to them. Among them stood Hertha, Baldur's blind brother, who smiled at the sound of the joy around him but did not join in. Loki approached him quietly, his voice low and kind. "Brother of Baldur," he said, "why do you not throw something as well?" Hertha frowned. "Because I cannot see where he stands, and I have no weapon." "Ah," Loki replied, "then take mine. I will guide your hand." He placed the mistletoe dart into Hertha's palm and lifted his arm. "There," he whispered. "Now throw." The dart flew true light as air, swift as fate, and pierced Baldur through the heart. The laughter stopped. For a moment, no one understood what had happened. Baldur staggered, his bright eyes wide with surprise. Then he fell silent, pale, still. The gods cried out, but it was too late. The one thing that could harm him had found him. The hall erupted in grief. Thor's roar shook the heavens. Frigg collapsed in Odin's arms, and tears said to turn into pearls as they fell rolled down her cheeks. Never before had the gods known such sorrow. Baldur's body was laid upon his ship, Hringhorni, the greatest vessel ever built. The gods tried to push it out to sea, but it was so heavy with grief that it would not budge until the giantess Hyrrokin arrived, riding a wolf and using serpents as reins. With one shove, she launched the ship, and the pyre was set alight. As flames consumed the bright god, even the heavens wept thunder rolling like a funeral drum. The death of Baldur was not merely a tragedy, it was a turning point, for it marked the moment when the balance of the world began to unravel. The death of light meant that darkness had found its way into the heart of Asgard, and deep beneath the earth, Hel smiled. For Baldur's spirit came to rest in her realm, a light among shadows, and she refused to let him go. Frigg sent messengers begging for his release. Hel agreed on one condition, that every being in the world must weep for Baldur's death, and so they did. Gods, humans, beasts, and even stones shed tears, all except one. An old giantess named Thok, who sat alone in a cave, dry-eyed and cold. When asked why she did not weep, she said simply, "Let Hel keep what she has." Some say that was Loki in disguise. Historians still argue whether the story is a metaphor for grief's denial or a warning against pride disguised as sorrow. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. Baldur remained in Hel's realm. From that day, Asgard's light dimmed. The gods spoke less and laughed rarely. Even Loki, when he walked the halls, could feel the weight of what he'd done. For though he had not thrown the dart himself, he had guided the hand that ended their joy, and that guilt, like mistletoe in winter, would cling to him forever pale, silent, and deadly. Some say that was the first crack in fate's great wall, the fracture through which Ragnarök began to whisper, and every sunset after that seemed just a little darker. In the long years after Baldur's death, silence hung over Asgard like frost. The laughter that once filled the golden halls had grown faint, and even the All-Father himself seemed older, his one remaining eye dimmed by worry. It was said that from that day forward, the world began to tremble beneath invisible cracks, small fractures in the order the gods had built. Some saw them in the restless waves, others in the way stars flickered where once they had burned steady. The Norns at the roots of Yggdrasil whispered of threads fraying in their loom. Odin sat often upon his high seat, Hilidskjalf, gazing across the 9 realms. He saw mortals growing restless, kings turning against kin, and oaths once sacred broken for greed or fear. Even the gods themselves quarrelled more often, as though the air itself carried unease. The scholars of later ages would say it was a mythic reflection of the world's entropy, the Norse way of describing moral and cosmic decay. But in the stories, the signs were far clearer, far colder. The first omen was the wolves. For ages untold, 2 beasts had chased the lights across the heavens, Skjöll, who pursued the sun, and Hati, who hunted the moon. The chase was meant to be eternal, a balance of pursuit and flight. But now the wolves grew stronger. Each day they drew closer. Mortals began to notice the sun darkening before its time, the moon shivering like a silver coin in the grasp of jaws unseen. "It has begun," whispered the seers. The second omen came from the roots of the world. Beneath Yggdrasil, the serpent Nidhogg had long gnawed at the tree's roots, feeding on corpses and hatred. Once its hunger had been kept in check. Now it devoured without pause, shaking the great ash so violently that its leaves withered in midair. And far above, the eagle perched at its crown screamed day and night, as though warning all creation that the end was near. The third omen was the Fimbulwinter, the Great Winter. It began without warning. First, a frost that lingered too long, then snow that buried crops, then ice that never thawed. Soon the world lay in a grip of endless cold. The wind cut like knives, and the rivers froze so deeply that even fish were locked in glassy tombs. And the strangest part there was no summer. For 3 years straight the winter did not break. No birds sang. No crops grew. People turned on each other, stealing and warring just to survive. Parents abandoned children. Brothers drew blades against brothers. In Midgard, they called it the Age of Wolves, when love froze in men's hearts and blood flowed like meltwater. Historians still argue, some say, whether the Fimbulwinter was a memory of a real volcanic winter in early Scandinavia. Yet, in the mythic sense, it was not merely weather, it was warning. For the gods knew, when kin killed kin and the bonds of honour dissolved, the world itself would begin to unravel. And so it did. Loki, bound in torment since his betrayal, began to stir. The venom that dripped upon his face, his punishment from the gods, still burned like acid. Each time he writhed, the earth trembled. Mortals called them earthquakes. But the gods knew it was the trickster struggling against his chains. And in the depths of the sea, Jörmungandr, the world serpent, began to move. His coils loosened, waves rose higher, and ships vanished without trace. Sailors swore they heard him breathing beneath the water, a sound like the tide gasping for air. Even Fenrir strained against Gleipnir. The delicate ribbon still held, but each twitch sounded like thunder, echoing through the mountains. The gods stopped pretending not to hear it. "Every bond we forged," Odin murmured, "was only a promise delayed." Then came the final sign. The rooster, Gullinkambi, bright as flame, crowed loudly in Asgard to wake the gods. Another crowed in Jotunheim to summon the giants. And a third, crimson-feathered, cried out in Hel's realm, calling the dead to rise. Each call was answered. From the land of the dead came ships made of fingernails and bone. From the east, a serpent's tail churned the seas into mountains. From the north, the giant Surtur lifted his flaming sword, its light brighter than 1,000 suns. And from the deepest pit, Loki's laughter echoed, no longer pained but triumphant. The sky itself split. The rainbow bridge Bifrost trembled under the weight of marching feet. The sound of horns filled the air, shaking all realms. It was the Gjallarhorn, blown by Heimdall, guardian of Asgard, to warn that the final battle was upon them. Even Odin could not stop it now. The Norns' tapestry had reached its last line, and not even the Allfather's will could unweave it. He rose slowly, his cloak heavy as time, and looked across his hall. "Each of you knows your part," he said quietly. "This is not the end of all things, only the end of our age." Thor gripped Mjolnir. Tyr tightened the binding on his missing wrist. Frey, who once brought peace, drew a sword he knew he would lose. And Odin turned his gaze toward the black horizon, where Fenrir's eyes burned like twin suns. It was said that in that moment even Yggdrasil sighed a sound like wind through old wood, as if the world itself mourned what must come. And somewhere far away, in the frozen silence of the Fimbulwinter, two humans hid inside a hollow tree, clutching one another against the cold. Their names were Leif and Lithrasir, Life and the Eager for Life. They did not yet know that they would one day inherit a new dawn, but that is a tale for later. For now, the long night was coming. The sun and moon fled their pursuers, gods armed themselves for destiny, and the world beautiful, broken, and brave waited for its final dawn. The horn's echo faded, but its call could not be undone. From the 9 corners of existence, the armies of fate began to march. The first to rise was Fenrir. With a sound like the breaking of mountains, the silken chain Gleipnir finally snapped. The wolf stood, shaking free the dust of ages, his roar turning the air to smoke. His jaws stretched wide, so wide they scraped the heavens and the earth. Between them burned the fire of his hatred, kindled since the day Tyr's hand vanished from his mouth. At that same moment, beneath the sea, the world serpent Jörmungandr uncoiled. His body churned the oceans into black storms, and his tail struck the surface like thunder. Waves swallowed ships whole. The sky darkened with the spray of salt and venom, and in the east the giants of Jotunheim began their march. Mountains trembled beneath their steps. Their king, Surtur, strode at the front, wielding a flaming sword forged before the dawn of time. Wherever he passed, ice melted and forests turned to ash. Then from Hel's cold realm came Loki, free at last. His eyes burned with cunning and bitterness, his laughter echoing across all realms. Behind him sailed the dread ship Naglfar, built from the nails of the dead. Upon its deck stood legions of the damned souls, twisted by hatred and the hunger for vengeance. And so, the enemies of the gods converged on Vigrid, the plain where the end was foretold to unfold. In Asgard, the gods prepared. Odin, grey and solemn, donned his golden helm and mounted Sleipnir, his 8-legged steed. Around him gathered the Einherjar, the souls of warriors who had feasted in Valhalla for centuries, now called to fulfill their final purpose. He looked upon them not as soldiers, but as companions, bound by courage and doom alike. "We ride," he said simply, "not to win, but to meet what must be." The gates of Valhalla opened, and the host of the gods rode forth, their armour gleaming faintly in the dimming light. Overhead, the sun and moon were finally caught devoured by Skurll and Hati. The sky turned black, and stars rained down like embers. Then came the thunder. Thor advanced through the storm, his hammer Mjolnir blazing with lightning. He faced the world serpent, whose body encircled the world, and the 2 locked eyes, one god, one monster, both children of prophecy. Thor struck first, The hammer crashed into the serpent's skull with a crack that split the sea. Jörmungandr reeled, striking back with fangs dripping venom. The ocean boiled around them, their battle shaking all realms. 3 times Thor struck, 3 times the serpent rose. At last, with a final roar, he crushed its skull and drove it into the deep. But as he staggered away, the serpent's poison filled the air, black and choking. Thor managed 9 steps before collapsing, lifeless beside his fallen foe. Elsewhere upon the field, Tyr met the hound Garm, guardian of Hell's Gate. They clashed with such fury that both perished, each tearing the other's throat in the same breath. Frey, the god of peace and fertility, faced the fire giant Surtur. Long ago, Frey had given away his enchanted sword for love, and now he fought bare-handed. His courage did not falter, but Surtur's flame consumed him, and the fields he once blessed turned to cinders. Above the battle, Odin rode toward his fate. He found Fenrir, and their eyes met for the final time. "Do what you were born to do," Odin whispered. The wolf lunged, and though the All-Father thrust his spear Gungnir with all his might, Fenrir caught him in his jaws and swallowed him whole. A terrible silence followed. Then, from the ranks of the gods, came Vidar, Odin's silent son. He stepped forward, wearing a single, enchanted shoe, made from all the leather scraps mortals had ever cut from their boots. A detail historians still debate as symbolic of humility's hidden power. Vidar pressed that shoe upon Fenrir's lower jaw, gripping the upper with his hands. With divine strength, he tore the wolf's mouth apart, killing him and avenging his father. But vengeance could not stop the world's unravelling. The earth split open, the seas boiled, the heavens burned. Loki and Heimdall met in combat, trickster and guardian, the chaos and the watchman. Their blades struck, their strength matched, and in the end each dealt the other a mortal blow. Then came the final flame. Surtur raised his burning sword high. The fire that had slept since the first dawn now rose again, sweeping across the 9 realms. Yggdrasil trembled, its branches ablaze. The oceans surged, the land sank, and all that had been was consumed. The world ended not with a scream, but with a sigh, as though, after all its labours, creation finally exhaled. For a long while there was nothing, only the hiss of dying flame, the whisper of wind over ash, and the faint rhythmic pulse beneath the void like a heartbeat. And then, miraculously, green. From the smoke rose a single sprout, soft and bright. Grass began to creep across the black soil. The rivers ran clear again, fed by melting frost. The sun, reborn from its devoured mother, rose anew, its light softer, warmer, forgiving. Amid the renewal, 2 humans emerged from the sheltering wood, Lif and Lifthrasir, the last of humankind, who had survived the long night by hiding in Yggdrasil's hollow trunk. They blinked at the dawn and took each other's hands. Around them, animals stirred. Birds sang once more. Far in the distance, a few gods returned, children of Thor and Baldur himself, stepping out from the mist of the new morning. The old world was gone. The new one, pure and unscarred, was theirs to shape. And in the golden light of that dawn, it was said that Odin's ravens still flew somewhere beyond sight, whispering memory into the wind, so that the world would never forget what it had been and what it had become. Silence lay over the ashes of the old world. The seas, once molten and black, now shimmered faintly beneath the dawn. Smoke drifted through the air like memory refusing to fade. The battle cries were gone, the clang of steel and the roar of monsters silenced. Only the slow rhythm of wind and wave remained, the breath of a world reborn. From beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree that had trembled through every age, two figures stepped into the new light, Lif and Lithrasir. Their eyes blinked against the brilliance of the new sun, a sun unlike the old, softer and golden, its warmth carrying the gentleness of renewal rather than the blaze of conquest. They walked across fields still damp with dew, and with each step grass rose behind them. Flowers bloomed from ash, rivers cleared themselves, and the air began to hum again with the low music of life. Birds, whose eggs had slept through fire and frost, broke their shells and sang to the sky. Deer wandered through mist that smelled faintly of cedar and salt. Far away, upon a hill untouched by flame, stood the remnants of a hall, not golden like Valhalla, but simple, built from new wood and stone. And there the new gods gathered. Baldur, radiant once more, had returned from Hell's shadowed halls. His light, once dimmed by death, now shone gently upon the land. Beside him stood his brother Hertha, forgiven, the blindness that had led to tragedy lifted. In their unity, grief and guilt melted into calm understanding. From the mists came Vidar and Vali, Odin's silent sons, survivors of the storm. Their armour bore the scars of Ragnarok, but their eyes looked not backward to vengeance, only forward to rebuilding. Marthi and Magni, Thor's mighty children, stood beside them, carrying their father's hammer Mjolnir, small enough now to serve creation rather than destruction. Together, these few divine heirs surveyed the vast, quiet world. No walls surrounded them, no enemies waited beyond the horizon. The air was free of prophecy, unbound by fate's cruel loops. For the first time since the dawn, there were no runes dictating what must be. Baldur turned to the others and spoke softly. The world that was is gone, but its memory remains carved, not in stone, but in the hearts of those who remember. They nodded. And so began the age of renewal. They taught Lif and Lithrasir how to sow and reap, how to speak with the earth and respect its rhythms. Seasons returned in gentle order, spring with its thaw, summer with its brightness, autumn's harvest, winter's rest. From the pair, humankind grew again, building homes not from conquest but from care. In time, songs were sung of the gods who once ruled the heavens, of the giants who once walked the earth, of the wolf and the serpent who brought the end. But as generations passed, the songs changed. The terror faded, and the tales became stories told to children by firelight, not of doom, but of balance. The people learned that endings were not punishment, but renewal, that every death held a seed of life, and they looked upon the new sky, where the sun shone brighter and the moon glowed silver and pure, and they felt the world watching them with quiet, patient eyes. Yggdrasil, though scarred, still stood its roots deep, its branches wide, its bark was blackened from flame, yet from those scars sprouted fresh green leaves, each one shimmering with dew. Beneath its shade, animals rested, and rivers sang of old battles turned to peace. It was said that sometimes, when the wind blew through the leaves just right, one could still hear whispers, echoes of the gods, who had been Odin's voice, distant but kind. Thor's laughter rolling like thunder across calm skies. Freya's tears falling as rain. The new world carried their spirits not as rulers, but as reminders that even gods must bow before the cycle of creation, destruction, and rebirth. And so the people learned to honour not only the living, but the fallen, not only the sun's rise, but its setting. In that balance, the world found peace. As twilight came once more, the light turned golden, spilling across hills and rivers. The world did not fear the dusk now, for it knew beyond every night waited another dawn. And thus the sagas ended, not in fire, but in quiet grace. The gods were gone, but their stories lived on, woven into the roots of Yggdrasil, whispered through every breeze, and carried forever in the hearts of those who dreamed beneath the new sun. For in the end, Ragnarok was not the death of the world, only its awakening. The world has turned, and the gods have faded into memory, yet their voices were never truly silenced. Across the fjords of Norway and the mossy stones of Iceland, their echoes still murmur in the wind. Odin's sacrifice, Thor's thunder, Loki's laughter, rippling through the ages. Centuries passed, kingdoms rose and fell, but the Norse myths endured. They lived in verses of skalds, sung by firelight through long winters. The sagas, Edda, Völuspá, Gylfaginning, became bridges between history and dream, carrying whispers of an age when men still spoke with gods. When monks first set these tales to parchment, they preserved more than stories. They caught a glimpse of a world that saw time not as a line, but a wheel ever turning, forever returning. Life and death, creation and ruin, each only a breath apart. That wheel still turns. Odin's runes adorn silver pendants, Thor's hammer hangs around modern necks, and Loki grins anew in films and pages. The old gods walk again, not in temples or halls, but in imagination. Some say these myths were once religion, others that they were poetry. But perhaps that difference never mattered. To the Norse, words were magic. To name was to give life. To carve a rune was to shape destiny. And so, when we speak their names, when we tell of Freya's tears or Baldur's light, we awaken them once more. In quiet fields of Scandinavia, rune stones still stand, weathered yet proud. Their markings hum faintly, like distant thunder, a reminder that stories, once spoken, outlast even mountains. And far beyond the north, those tales have found new homes. In America, children dream of lightning in their hands. In Japan, artists draw the sly smile of a trickster. In Iceland, some still hesitate to deny the elves. Wonder, it seems, forgets to die. Perhaps that is the gods' true immortality, not in belief, but in remembrance. They live wherever someone listens, eyes half closed, as the wind whispers at the window. Even in Ragnarok, there was rebirth. The fire ended one world only to begin another. So remember, myths do not die. They sleep. And when we tell them again, they wake.